Hey guys, today we are going to analyze the poem I Sit and Look Out, written by Walt Whitman. Walt Whitman is considered one of America's most influential poets and was often called the father of free verse. He was born on 31st May 1819 in West Hills, Long Island, New York, and was the second of 9 children. His father, Walter, was a laborer, carpenter, and house builder. His mother, Louisa, was a devout Quaker. At the age of 12, Whitman began to learn the printer's trade and fell in love with the written word. Largely self-taught, he read voraciously, becoming acquainted with the works of Homer, Dante, Shakespeare, and the Bible. In 1836, at the age of 17, he began his career as teacher in the one-room schoolhouse on Long Island. He continued to teach until 1841, when he turned to journalism as a full-time career. At the outbreak of the Civil War, Whitman worked as a freelance journalist and visited the wounded at New York City area hospitals. He traveled to Washington, D.C. in December 1862 to care for his brother who had been wounded in the war. Overcome by the suffering of the many wounded in Washington, Whitman decided to stay and work in the hospitals. He ended up staying in the city for 11 years. In 1873, Whitman suffered a stroke that left him partially paralyzed. Whitman spent his declining years working on additions and revisions to his deathbed edition of Leaves of Grass. After his death on March 26, 1892, Whitman was buried in a tomb he designed and had built on a lot in Harley Cemetery. A school, a shopping mall, and the Walt Whitman Bridge across the Delaware River were named after him. First published in the 1860 edition of Leaves of Grass, this 10-line lyric titled I Sit and Look Out is a severe criticism of the oppression of human beings perpetrated by their own fellow human beings. He sees sorrow, oppression, shame, anguish, chaos, neglect of the elderly people, ill treatment meted out to women, pestilence, tyranny, exploitation of workers, and eternal agony. The poet looks at this sad spectacle of life and remains silent. He says, all the meanness and agony without end, I, sitting, look out upon, see, hear, and am silent. The poet neither tries to find out the reason for the suffering of humanity, nor does he offer any remedy to improve the sufferings of the poor workers. But he does criticize the oppression of human beings by their fellow beings. Let us read through the poem. I Sit and Look Out by Walt Whitman. I sit and look out upon all the sorrows of the world, and upon all oppression and shame. I hear secret convulsive sobs from young men at anguish with themselves, remorseful after deeds done. I see in low life the mother misused by her children, dying, neglected, gaunt, desperate. I see the wife misused by her husband. I see the treacherous seducer of young women. I mark the ranklings of jealousy and unrequited love attempted to be hid. I see these sights on the earth. I see the workings of battle, pestilence, tyranny. I see martyrs and prisoners. I observe a famine at sea. I observe the sailors casting lot, who shall be killed to preserve the lives of the rest. I observe the slight and degradation cast by arrogant persons upon laborers, the poor, and upon negroes and the like. All the meanness and agony without end. I, sitting, look out upon, see, hear, and am silent. Before we analyze the poem, let us look at the historical background. This poem was published in 1860 during a time when most Americans were fearful that the issue of slavery was not going to be resolved peacefully, which proved to be true as the American Civil War was soon followed. There was a great insecurity about the country's future. Society was falling apart, and people were disillusioned by the wrongness others were dealt. The poem criticizes capitalism because it changed people's lives into a rat race for materialistic possessions, which sidelined human concerns and emotions. Capitalism had a tremendous impact on the lives of the people in the 1800s. Human ethics were neglected because people were focused on achieving the American dream, especially after the Civil War. The theme of the poem is a plea for humanity to regain its moral values. The poem describes the miseries and cruelties that became part of life after capitalism and the quest for wealth became prominent in this society. These horrors are all around us too, and if all we do is see, hear, and remain silent, they will overwhelm us. The poem is a call to take positive action in a society that is heading towards disaster. The poet condemns himself at the end because he has remained silent. In doing so, he condemns all of us who observe but do nothing. However, the poet in reality does not remain inactive or silent. He writes this poem. The poem speaks for him. It opens a window for everyone to see the cruelty that is taking place so that we can take action. This is a philosophical or deep thinking poem. Whitman's life was coming to an end, and he was thinking back on things, probably with a feeling of guilt and regret he had seen in his lifetime and society that caused others pain and anguish. The poem makes a strong point about social values. In this poem, the focus is on the many actions and attitudes that cause sorrow and shame in the world, and it is presented in the form of a list. Let's quickly look at the stylistic devices. In a typical Walt Whitman style, this is a free verse. The poem consists of only one line. This echoes the continuity of the situation. One line continues into the next, just like the problems. The problems will never end. The poem has a pessimistic, depressed, or serious tone. The mood is sad. This is a sad poem about the state of humanity after capitalism had started. Throughout the poem, the poet makes use of repetition. Words like I look at, I see, I mark, I observe, I hear are often repeated. The repetition emphasizes the range of cruelties and violent acts, the suffering caused by these acts, and his passive disposition towards these horrors. The title of the poem is I Sit and Look Out. The capital letter in sit emphasizes the passive observation or idleness of the poet. This is further emphasized by the beginnings of all the following lines that lack any action. Look out proves that he is removed from the suffering and only concerned about his own safety. The poem has a first-person narrator. The poet, Whitman, is the narrator as he shares first-hand experiences. By using a first-person narrator, the issues mentioned becomes personal. The repetitive use of I in I sit, I hear, I see, and I observe emphasizes this and makes the poem universal because it questions how we would react. The word sit and look indicates that the person is passive, removed from the suffering, and is only concerned about his own welfare. He is not going to get involved. The poet sits and looks out, but what he sees is not the beauty of the earth. Instead, he sees society riddled with pain and sadness that humanity has caused itself. This is ironic. The first line begins with I, indicating a first-person narrator. We find this word is used 14 times throughout the poem if you include the I in the title. He looks out and he sees oppression, people who are ill-treated, and humiliation. The word all is a form of hyperbole. He cannot possibly see all the pain and sorrow in the world, but he exaggerates by saying he does. He looks upon all the oppression and shame. Oppression refers to the people who are ruled by fear. In line 2, he hears young people crying with regret or remorse. They regret their shameful deeds. They often say, all is fair in love and war. But when innocent men are forced to kill other human beings on a battlefield, it leaves psychological scars. Because they are ashamed of these deeds, they try to hide it from others and keep it a secret. He hears the uncontrollable cries of these young men. The young men are most likely soldiers. The word anguish indicates their severe mental or physical pain or suffering. These men are remorseful after their deeds because they realize they cannot undo what they have done. In line 3, he sees a mother who raised her children despite poverty, but now she is being abused and neglected by her children. Low life means in poverty. The mother is described as thin, troubled, dying, alone, and desperate for love and affection, yet she is being ignored by her children. The word neglected does not only refer to physical neglect, but also emotional neglect. The word gaunt means lean and haggard, especially because of suffering, hunger, or old age. As already said, he sees a mother who has raised her children despite poverty, but who is now being abused by those same children. In line 4, he sees men who abuse women, a husband's misuse of his wife, and some who are deceitful and heartlessly seduces young women. In a marriage, the husband and wife are supposed to protect one another against the onslaughts of the outside world, but that is not always the case. Misused refers to the abuse of the wife. He also sees the treacherous seducer of young women. Treacherous refers to people who cannot be trusted. He talks about men seducing women, but it can also be women seducing men. In line 5, he marks the ranklings of jealousy and unrequited love. Rejected lovers often experience feelings of jealousy, bitterness, worthlessness, and anger. Ranklings refer to the effects of jealousy. Unrequited love is love that is unreturned. I suppose it will be when the girl says, "Maybe we should just be friends." Attempted to be hit refers to their attempts to try and hide their feelings behind smiles and friendliness. When we ask people, "How are you doing?" they often reply with, "I'm well, thank you," and add a smile trying to hide their pain. But in reality, they are broken inside and are bearing their pain in solitude. In line 6, he sees the workings of battle, pestilence, tyranny, martyrs, and prisoners. The workings refer to the effects. It can be physical, for example, the injuries sustained during battle, or emotional. A synonym for the word battle is war. He refers to the millions of innocent people dying because of war. Pestilence refers to illness, which can cause widespread death and sorrow. We are currently in lockdown. Need I say more? Tyranny is oppression caused by rulers who treat their people with cruelty. These rulers rule by fear. It is here where immorality sets in. I do it because I want to. It is more about self-worth and self-gain and less about the welfare of others. Martyrs are people willing to die for what they believe in. A good example will be the Taliban suicide bombers. In line 7, he writes about a famine at sea. Famine is an extreme scarcity of food. He observes sailors casting lot. This is survival of the fittest. The famine at sea causes the fishermen to act in a manner that is inhumane. They have to decide who must die so that the others can live, because there is not enough food to feed everyone. This is inhumane, but we are facing the consequences of our own actions. The men decide who must die by casting lot. The fact that we are the cause of many of our problems is ironic. Overfishing, deforestation, and pollution, to mention but a few, are all contributors to our suffering, but we have no one to blame for this but ourselves. In line 8, he refers to the effects of capitalism. Some are now very rich and others very poor. Slight refers to those small gestures, for example, a judgmental look, or simply walking past someone without greeting them. These are the small things we do to other people to make them feel inferior. How do you react when a beggar asks you for money? Arrogant refers to people who think they are better than others. These people are often known as snobs. People are often oppressed because they are poor. Negroes is a term used to refer to African Americans, niggers. This is an example of racism. He sees how the Negroes and the poor are oppressed, turned into slaves, insulted, and treated in a despicable manner. And the like refers to everyone else they consider to be beneath them. In line 9, he refers to all the injustice mentioned throughout the poem. All the meanness refers to all the people who are mean and their cruelness. Agony refers to the emotional pain. The poet says it is without end because he feels as if it will continue forever, and he might just be right. The poem was written 160 years ago, and we still face the same problems today. After the words without end, we almost expect the poet to deliver judgment, but he still does nothing. He remains passive. The poet feels helpless. These issues are far too difficult for an individual to resolve. He remains sitting. He does not get involved. And in the last line, we see he is silent. He does not pass judgment, and he does not mention a moral value to be followed. While he is sitting, an underlying fear and tension enter the minds of the reader. This is an awakening call for the reader. The poem makes us feel that we are sitting by while these horrors are happening. He wants us to respond in disgust, but the poet never expresses his own disgust. We recoil at his observations. Our inner sense of justice makes us feel that we must rise up and take steps to change the situation. In the end, we realize the poet has not done nothing. He wrote the poem to make us aware of these injustices. He is therefore not really silent. Through that, we become involved in his cause. That concludes our discussion of the poem, I Sit and Look Out. I hope that this poem will inspire you to get involved in a world that so desperately needs heroes. Goodbye.